One thing before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the last turn-in. You guys did really well. I was quite happy with everything that I saw. You guys are progressing very nicely, so you should definitely be proud of what you've accomplished so far. Who thought you guys would be building models in 3 weeks, right? Crazy. But something I wanted to point out, if you guys, very few of you got very many things wrong, but the one thing that I saw more often than not, and I don't know about your end, Brian, was naming the geometry versus naming the file, because those are two totally different ideas. So the first thing we ask for is naming the file, and that's when you save it, file save scene as. But we also ask you to name the geometry itself, because you might have many objects in any given scene, and I could have upwards of 100 spheres, depending on whatever the heck it is I'm building. So it is very important, as you guys remember from the very first activity we did, Captain Idaho, I need to know the names of things when I'm looking them up in the outliner and so forth, so it's really important to name that stuff. So when I say name the asset, what I'm talking about is select the geometry and then make sure you get the channel box open, right, which is this icon right here, and then just type in this field, not down here in the shape node, not anywhere else, just right up here at the top. Just type in there, my cool sphere, and hit return, and now the geometry has been named. And name the group, absolutely, because if I grab these two objects, thank you, Brian, and I say edit group them, right, I've created a group, be sure to name the group node. Two cool shapes, enter. So again, we name those group nodes, that's important also. We try to leave as little as possible at its default name in Maya. As soon as you start creating, you start naming. That's the way that works. Display layers. Yep, display layers, same thing. When you make a layer, make sure you name that layer. Make sense? Get a hell yeah out of there? There we go. All right. So anyway, again, that was something I just wanted to touch on because we have another turn-in on Monday night, and guess what? Big surprise, those are things that we're going to be looking for, and you lose points if you don't do it. So don't lose points over silly stuff. The hard, really challenging things, okay, fight for those. But the easy ones, get those points. That's what they're there for. All righty, so today we're going to be talking more about UV mapping. And I know you guys have been like dreaming about this stuff now. You can't wait to get into it. In terms of UV mapping, we're going to be sort of picking up where we left off. We're still going to be doing some of those UV mapping things again today, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about how you can improve the layout of your UV shell, and in many instances, sew shells together or split them apart as your needs require. But what I'd like you to think about overall, UV mapping is kind of like being a tailor, because if you think about it, you are a 3D entity, right? You have depth. So in terms of people, we are 3D. Cloth, which we make clothing out, is 2D, right? It's flat. So in terms of what's going on with UV mapping, it's kind of like making clothes that will fit objects. So we have seams and we create shells which we attach to each other or detach from each other. And what you'll notice is that quite a few terms in UV mapping have tailor-like terminology, because that is kind of what's going on there. I'm making a special suit that fits very nicely onto my geometry. So just keep an eye out for that. And like I said, we're going to go into some more techniques about how we can improve our UV layout, because quality is definitely important. We're going to be discussing using the Unfold tool and the Smooth UVs tool. We're going to be moving and sewing shells. So a lot of really fun stuff. And of course, we're going to get into texture application and the generation of an AO pass, or an ambient occlusion pass, which is really fun because it kind of makes your model look a little bit dingy, dirty, and it makes it look cool. So a couple of really fun things we're going to get into today, and all center around making sure you have a good UV layout, because it will affect your textures if your UV layout is poor. All right, so let's get into this stuff. Without further ado, And let me get into share my screen before Brian tells me that. I got you today. Yeah, I've been up since 4. Yeah. I've been up since 4, so yeah. Show my screen. All right. So here we go. All right, lecture 9 rather. Here we go, lecture 9. Running out of lectures. 4. I know. I thought 4. You know what? I just wanted to go back, I guess. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about my slides and the fact that I'm going to have to re-edit them all because this version has moved all my stuff around. But we're going to take a look at improving our UV layout on our geometry because we've learned how to create shells and we've learned how to apply a checker pattern to it. Now let's make it look better. Now, as I said, one of the things we're going to talk about in refining UV layout is the use of 2 tools, the Cut UVs tool and the Move and Sew tool, which allow us to sort of cut the UV shells where we need to, and we can literally sew them together in an effort to remove the seams that are generated. And just to give you an idea about the texture seams and what we're getting at with that, again, a lot like clothing, the cloth material, if you're going to cut it so that it'll wrap around something that's 3D, there's going to be seams in the material, and that's where you're sewing the shells together. Does that make sense? So in many instances, there has to be a seam because otherwise you can't do it, you know, unless you take a sheet and cut a hole in the top and just drape it over you. There's going to be, in order to accommodate complex curvature, there's going to have to be some cuts in the material, and these generate what we call texture seams. And it happens in your UV shells as well. And a very important aspect of UV shells and their seams is where to put them, because we're always trying to hide seams if we can. So for example, if you look at my shirt, where are the seams? In places where my arm will cover it, across the top of my shoulder, where you're not likely to see it. Does that make sense? The seam doesn't run right down the middle. We try to hide the seam. So when we're creating UV shells, we're always trying to hide the seam wherever we think we can hide it, where it's less conspicuous. Now, it is true, we have tools called the 3D Paint tool, which it kind of works like the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, where we can paint over seams and generate a new texture, and that kind of removes the seam in there, and we can tile out our textures. There's some things we can do, but sometimes it's really hard to hide that seam. So what we do is we always try to put the seam in the least conspicuous place, just in case we can't fix it. Does that make sense? We always want to put it somewhere where it's not going to be a big deal. So looking for where to put it is an important concept of UV mapping and shells. Now, in terms of the Move and Sew tool, I'm going to show you how to use that, and this is an activity, so you know I've got a fun little file for you to work on. And again, we're moving and sewing UV shells. So first things first, we want to make sure we set our project to our activity file folder. And get your copy of Maya up there. File, set project, and I want to be sure to choose my activity file folder. File, open scene, and get my advanced UV tool activity. And when we open this, you see that marker that we created. And you know, not that the UV layout is terrible on this thing, excuse me, but it could be a whole lot better. For example, if you look at this, have you guys noticed that the squares that go around this part of this object are not squares, they're rectangles, so there's a little distortion going on. But you notice that these squares are bigger than these squares and bigger than those squares. So these objects all have different resolutions than one another. And I just want to talk a little bit about resolution before we go any further down that road, because resolution is important. Now, in terms of resolution, what the heck is Steve talking about? let's take a look at where's my image, my other one? I used to have two of them. That makes me sad. All right, well, let me do this. I'm going to do a very quick search here because this is important stuff. And I want you to see it. Okay, so I'm just doing a quick search for an image. And I just want to show you. I'll do a clip art one, maybe that'll help. Oh, there we go. Let's take a look at that guy. All right, now in terms of this image, you can see it's not a very high quality image, and not because the picture is very simple, but you notice that as I zoom in on this object, you'll see that the quality of the image degrades. So, for example, you notice that as I move in on this picture, I start to see individual pixels. Do you see how that's happening? All right. Now, what we're seeing here is that this is a very low resolution image. It's not very big. Images are made of pixels. They are the smallest unit of any given image we look at, dots, right? Now, these dots come together, and they're sort of squarish in shape, pixels. They come together to form an image. And when you've got enough dots, they start to look more detailed. Does that make sense? They look smooth and curved, not like square little pixels. So the more pixels you have, the more smooth and curved they appear. They are still blocks. They're still little squares, but they look more smooth when there's more of them. When there's fewer of them, you can see them when you get close. You can see each individual one. That is a low resolution image. Now, on the other side, we can have a high resolution image. This is an image that has many, many pixels. And the reason I know this is because as I get closer, you can see I get very, very close, and I still don't see the pixels. It's not getting blocky yet because there are many, many, many pixels in there. So I keep moving in, and then finally I start to see individual pixels. So if you get in close enough, you can always get back to pixels. Does that make sense? Okay. So now in terms of the image, obviously the more pixels associated with the image, the smoother and the nicer that image appears. And that's what we want to go for. Now in terms of Maya and how that relates, when we are creating a UV shell, and I'm going to go to my UV editor so you can see it. When we are creating a UV shell, our shells have to fit into this 0 to 1 space here when we're all done, right? We talked about this last class, but we'll get into that some more. But the point is, literally and figuratively, this area is finite, and this holds the pixels, again, like a picture frame. Now, the number of pixels that go in here is up to me. I can decide how big this picture is. But the important thing for you to realize is my textures have to fit in here so that the pixels will populate inside the shells. So when the shell is very big, lots of pixels will fit inside. When the shell is smaller, fewer pixels fit inside. Does that make sense? So what that means is when I am making UV shells, I want to make them as big as I can so I can get more pixels inside that space to give me a higher quality image, a higher resolution to my texture. Does that make sense? Get a hell maybe on that? Okay, I'll take a hell maybe. Again, these are concepts we're working on. And I'm one of those people who believes in introducing concepts that might be a step above where you're at, but by exposing you to those things, you hear these words and they start to rattle around. Maybe next time you hear them, they'll make more sense to you, but I like to introduce stuff because I think if you can get over the terms, maybe next time we can deal with just concepts. So, but this is very important thought process for texturing, and in particular, UV mapping. All right, so again, our goal is to have an object where all of the parts of the object have the same resolution. Does that make sense? The whole thing. Not just this piece should have all the same size squares, but this whole object should have the same size squares. And the reason we're doing that is because our end result, and you know I'm always talking about make sure you know what your end result is because that guides your thought process. Our end result is we're going to be creating a rendered image, a still image of our object. Does that make sense? So with that thought process in mind, the camera's not moving, right? So where would be a good place to put texture seams if I had any? On the back, right? So because I know the camera's not moving, and I know we're this close, and I can see the whole object, that starts to help me decide, okay, now I know how to lay out my UV shells. Does that make sense? Because then I can start thinking, okay, if this is what I'm going to end up with, if I have a seam, I definitely want it on the back side of my objects so they can't be seen in the event I can't fix them, right? I'm going to be super close to the object, so it's got to be a good layout. It's got to look good because it's going to be close. And everything needs to be the same resolution in terms of the size of the shells relative to each other. Does that make sense? So again, knowing what I needed to do helps me make decisions, smart ones, about how to do this. That make sense? Okay, good. Again, the wheels are turning, and that's what I like. So again, camera's not moving, so I don't have to worry about stuff like that. In terms of the whole thing has to look fabulous. Maybe I have to put the seams on the bottom. No, not in this case, because I'm taking one picture from one side. Does that make sense? Yes?
Question. I've always had a problem when you're doing the UV editing.
Yes.
It comes with different pieces.
Yes.
Right. Is there any way to number those pieces? Because you're trying to remember where everything goes.
That's a terrific question. In terms of organizing, the question is, how do I organize my UV shells?
So I know what.
Exactly. You can actually create layers and put those UV shells on different layers, and if you name the layers, that will help you do it. Does that make sense? So that, and again, that's like a second or third tier thought. So, you know, I don't want you guys to panic. What did you just talk about? What we're talking about is much like we put geometry on layers to organize it so we can hide and show things as we like. You can create layers for UV shells as well. But something that I like to do on a more simplistic level is I'll just apply different materials to different objects, and then therefore, since they're totally different, it will isolate them. So, but it's however you want to do it. But that's a great question and good thinking. How do I isolate and organize things? Because that's what we always do. It's art, but we've got to organize it too. So again, this is our end game. So this is going to guide my thought process on how I'm going to UV map something and where I'm going to put my texture seams and, you know, what size do my shells need to be. Make sense? All right, so let's look at trying to improve our UV shell layout using the cut tool and the move and sew tool. So, excuse me. Let me get back to my buddy Maya. And of course, the whole object has to be UV mapped, but we're just going to work on this one particular piece here, which is sort of the collar of the marker. It helps to hold, helps to transition from the ink tank over here to the cap area. All right, so in the UV editor, I can see, okay, I've got decent layout because I see, you know, kind of okay shapes in here. But something to look at is the fact that I can see the texture seam here. There's a transition. It obviously does not flow fluidly from here to here. So what I'm going to need to do is sew this together and try to eliminate that seam. So I can literally grab an edge right here where I see the seam, and it will grab it in here as well. I can see these two edges here attached to these two edges there. Do you guys see how those go together? When you select an edge of a UV shell, its brother and sister edges, wherever it's supposed to connect, will also light up because they are the same edge. It's one edge, but it's represented by two different shells. Does that make sense? It is the same edge. Now, just looking at this, if I know for a fact that these two pieces connect to each other, and I'm just going to move them over here for a second to make it easier to see, which is why we work in the workspace in general. But if I know that the edges here attached to the edges there, there's something wrong with this shell. Right away I see it's way too small, right? Because this edge is technically the same edge as that one. Does that make sense? So I know it's not the right size. So I can grab that edge, and this is something that I like to do, just make it bigger. And if I select an edge and I go, okay, that looks closer. It looks like it needs to be a little bit bigger. But do you see how I can tell right away my shells are not right in terms of their size? But something I want to draw your attention to, notice the change in the size of my squares. Do you notice how they're getting closer to the same size? My resolution is almost identical now at this point. The proportions of the shells relative to the object they represent are getting closer to accurate, and that's why the squares look better. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, in terms of attaching shells to each other, you can do that. And I have to be in UV mode, obviously, to select my UVs. But in terms of getting my shells to attach to each other, I will typically make the shells larger so that they look like they would attach. I bring them near to each other so that they kind of line up. And then I can literally grab the edges. And I grab just that edge, and I'm going to go all the way down to this end and double-click this edge, and it will grab all the way across between the two. All right. And then in my UV editor, because you notice it's got its own little fun tools in here, right? Under Cut and Sew, I will find Move and Sew. And this will literally move and sew those two shells together. And look what happens to that texture seam. Do you guys see how it went away? Here was before. Here's after. Now I've got a fluid transition of texture from this part of this object to this part of this object. And where this becomes very important is if on this object, let's say that there's some text running down the side of it, like Markero, the best marker ever. If there's text running across my marker and I have a seam there, it's not going to line up very well. But if I sew that seam together, attach those shells, now I've got a fluid transition. I could have a word or some text or a graphic of some kind run down the side of this marker, and it wouldn't cause a seam like it does on my shirt. Does that make sense? Because if you look at my shirt and you look at how one side sews into the other side, and you can see the pattern is groovy, but it's not a fluid transition from here to here. I can see the interruption. Does that make sense? I can tell where the seam is because the pattern doesn't continue like it does on the rest of it. So what we're trying to do is, wherever we can, eliminate those seams. But with this one very important guideline, we do not compromise the quality of the UV layout just to attach seams. that make sense? The goal is not no seams. No one will ever look at your model and go, wow, your texture stinks. But is it seamless? No. The goal is great UV layout, nice looking texture. If you can eliminate seams, bonus. Does that make sense? So keep your eye on the prize. You attach shells. If it's a significant improvement, you keep it. If it's a catastrophic mess, you don't. As a beginner, I usually recommend you guys size the shells to match each other before you sew them together so you can see right away if it did well. And this is the reason why. It is possible for UV shells of different sizes to be attached to each other. Now, in terms of these shells, watch what happens. These are supposed to go together, right? I made one of them bigger a minute ago so they'd match better. You can see they don't look good here. But this time I'm not going to adjust it. I'm just going to go ahead and attach it. Move and sew. Maya did sew those things together. It took those two shells. They could have been on opposite sides of the UV editor. If I select them and say move and sew, they're going to go together. But you can see, obviously that's not a good layout because I'm seeing some distortion there. So I might be led to believe, ooh, you know what, maybe I didn't do such a good job. Maybe those shouldn't be attached. Does that make sense? So again, as a beginner, I typically recommend get those pieces near to each other. Get them the right size. Get the resolution similar, and then attach them, because that's really going to give you your best look at how did it turn out. Is this a good attachment or not? Does that make sense? Okay, we're just attaching shells to each other, but important to think about what you're getting when you do it. All right, so again, I like to make them of similar size because then I can tell right away if they turned out well. Whoop. Again, nice fluid transition here. So now I'm going to do another one just so you can see it. All right, I grab this little edge here and it tells me, oh, that's its little brother over there. So I'm going to take this shell. And you're starting to see why the workspace is so big, right? I need a lot of area. It's like having a big, huge, empty desk to do your art on. It's great when you got a lot of space. So now I can take this and move it over here. And again, I see these don't line up well, and you can see where the texture seam is. But I know that this edge here goes to that edge there, so this one's going to have to be bigger, or the other one's smaller. It's immaterial. Go to UV mode, grab my UVs, scale them up, and just move them, you know, ballpark where they're going to go so I can see how I'm doing. All right. And it looks like it could be a little bit bigger. That's a little bit better alignment. Grab both of those edges, move and sew. All right, and you can see again that nice fluid transition from one surface to the other on the same object. All right, now Brian and I are going to walk around and just make sure you guys can do a little bit of this move and sew, and then we're going to get into some more stuff about how we can improve the quality of our UV shells. How you guys doing with move and sew? Yep, make sure you're selecting edges when you move and sew. Yep, it works off of edges. There you go. It's under. Oh yeah, you have the other one. It's going to be under polygons. Yeah, sorry. One of the craziest things about Maya 2017 is half of 2017 is in the older style of UV editor, and half of 2017 is in the newer. If you look at your UV editor and in the left-hand corner you see the word polygons, look under polygons for all the stuff you need, because it used to be grouped under that. They just moved it somewhere else to make my life difficult. But that's where it is. If you grab this one, and then hold shift and double click that one, it grabs everything in between. All right, how are you doing? Yeah, it's under polygons. You'll see move and sew. It's towards the bottom. Keep going. There you go. That's it. Move and sew, the magical tool. How you doing? Good? Good. Well, it looks like you guys are doing well. And I hope my digital friends, you guys heard that. 2017 has a couple of different versions of the UV editor. So just make sure it's move and sew. You'll see cut sew in the UV editor, and that's where these tools are. And if you are in the older version of 2017, if you look in the way upper left-hand corner, you'll see polygons. And if you go down, you'll see move and sew. It's like 5/6 of the way down on that. But it's all under polygons. So they grouped it differently. They changed the editor. It's great. Welcome to my world. Yes? Right. Well, that's what we're going to work on next.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is eliminate. No. You're thinking right. It needs to be better because that's what we want. We want a better UV layout. We're always going for as good as we can get. Yes. Yep. We want to select edges and then move and sew. So go to edge mode, right? Grab that edge, the top one. There. Now double click on the top one on this side, holding shift. That grabs both edges, right?
Right.
Now you'll go to polygons and choose move and sew. See? They attach. How you guys doing back here? Good? How you doing? You sewing yet? Okay. You want to select the edges across the top. So you go to edge mode. Right in here. Edges. Right mouse button. Edge. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Now select that edge there. Yep. That one. The top. Right. Now hold shift and grab it there because we're trying to sew this one to this one, right? But double click it. Oop, try it again. We just want that one row. Okay. Now, polygons, move and sew. There you go. Just as it is. You don't need to adjust anything. See? Now they attach to each other. Does that make sense? That eliminates the texture seam. Yeah.
This is supposed to be up here.
Yes. Yep, it's going to attach eventually. Yep. It's just kind of small. You're probably going to have to make it a little bit bigger to attach it. So grab the whole thing in UV and scale it. How are you doing? Okay, make sure you're only selecting one edge. You want to grab the whole thing because that's going to bring other stuff. So grab like just that one edge there on the top. And then hold shift and double click on the one on the other side. Oop, try it again. Click one. Double click over there.
With shift or no?
Yep, hold shift. There you go. Now you just have that row, move and sew. See? Got it. How are we doing?
Yeah, I'm just trying to sew these edges.
Yep, go to edge mode.
I know how to do it. I found out how to do it.
Edge mode.
Okay, edge mode.
Select one. Now hold shift and double click on that end, and that will grab all of them in between. Now move and sew. Yep, it's under polygons, move and sew. Yep. Sewing it together. Looking for the file?
I was looking for it.
Oh yeah, it should be the advanced UV.
I didn't have the reinstall or re-download the file.
Oh, you had to re-download the file? Okay. Yeah, so re-download that file. The advanced UV is the name of the activity.
And then it's easier to see the shell.
How you doing? Good?
You see what that shell is. What you're trying to do is find this shell. And so you can click around to these different shells.
Brought it over,
Mm-hmm.
and the edge was on the other side.
Right.
Ah, so there may be something you got to do to get those edges to line up.
Well, I think because
Oh, okay, because it looks like it's lined up okay. Because when you put your cursor over that,
but I think because my my mouse, I go, and then I try to size,
Mhm.
and then it jump to small.
Okay, no, that's
Thank you.
okay. No, that's okay. It's just grab the UVs and try to size it again. There you go.
That way you have plenty of that space to scale, move, and move it so and cut. Okay, so those two, right? So those two are the ones you're putting together.
There you go.
That one and that one.
All right, now try to sew them together.
Now,
Looks good. How are you guys doing up here? You moving and sewing like a champ?
How do you do it again?
Grab that edge. Double click on that one. And then, whoop, try it again. Yeah. Grab that one. Hold shift. And double click that one. Now, polygons move and sew.
so once you realize that, now you know where you have to line them up. What I do, I go back to shell mode.
All right, good. Looks like you guys are doing pretty well with this. Again, move and sew. A big help in reducing the number of seams that you have on your model. Now, some of these other pieces here, if you grab them, you realize that they represent this back edge here, and then this one right here represents this lead edge there. And just like those other seams, you want to try to attach them to each other. And you can see, although they are very small faces, ultimately we are going to attach them, this surface to that surface, and the better job we do, the more seamless it appears. All right, and incidentally, of course you can edit your UVs a little bit by hand to make them look better. All right. Now I'm going to grab that piece and I'm going to attach it as well. Grab this, move it over here. And again, I try to get them pretty close to the right size. Before I attach them, get them close to where they're going to go. And again, this is just for beginners. As you get more accomplished at this, you won't necessarily have to do that. But I think it's helpful at the beginning, so you can see more quickly how well your layout is going. All right, so you can see overall, it's looking pretty good now in terms of my layout. So now, what I'm going to do is try to make the squares a little bit more evenly sized. They're pretty close. And in some of those transitions, we see a little bit of distortion. So what can we do to improve that? And that's where we're going to get into some new tools that will help us basically iron out the wrinkles. So let's get into those guys, because that's the next step. All right. Here we go. Now, in terms of UV mapping and how we can improve our layout, again, sometimes we end up with sort of wrinkles or distortions in our checker pattern, and Maya actually has some tools that will help us to iron out these problems and make them look better. The two tools that I like to use are the Smooth UVs tool and the Unfold tool, both of which do more or less the same thing, and that is kind of iron out your UV shells to make them look better. Now, the important thing for you to understand about these two tools and the way they work is your job is to lay out your UV shells as well as you possibly can. Then you use these tools, and what Maya does is Maya takes a look at your UV shell, it takes a look at the geometry, and it says, okay, I can see what you're trying to do here, and I'm going to try and use a mathematical formula or algorithm. I'm going to use a formula to try to make the faces on your UV shells be as close to the same size, shape, and proportion of the faces on the actual geometry as I can, again, using math. So the goal is you want to bring your UVs into, 80% quality level, and then Maya will take it the rest of the way, and in most cases improve it dramatically. Does that make sense? So, but you have to do some of the footwork. It's not like the magical, hey, fix it, Maya, because I'm not going to take the time. You got to do the footwork, and then Maya will pick up the slack. So, in terms of the smooth UVs and the unfold tools, these are a terrific help in getting a better UV layout. We're going to use this same file, the one with the marker, and we're going to use those tools. And I just show you the two different tools and how they can be utilized. Now, again, if you look at my marker, you can see I've got some distortion. These aren't really quite squares. And I could, if I wanted to, because I don't think enough people realize, you can actually just grab your UVs and kind of make adjustments to them yourself physically and improve the layout. So, again, if you want, you can just hand do some of these adjustments to try to improve the quality. You can see there's a little bit of distortion going on there. So don't discount your own ability to make this stuff look better on a UV by UV basis. You can literally go in and do it yourself. But again, what's great is Maya has these other tools that will help me. Now, the two tools that we're looking for are the smooth tool and the unfold tool. And if you go to modify, you will see the unfold tool down here at the bottom, and the smooth tool I think they put under tools. Yeah, they put it over there. Now, if you are in the older version of Maya, both of those should be under polygons. Oh no, wait, one of them is under polygons and the other one's under tools. So unfold is under polygons, and I believe smooth UV tool is under tool in the old interface. But I'll walk around to make sure you've got the right one. But anyway, the way it works is I'll show you the smooth tool first, because I'm a big fan of that one. What you want to do is grab your UV shell, whichever one you're working on, and you want to do it one shell at a time. You don't want to grab every shell at once and ask Maya to figure it out. It can lead to some crashing. But what you want to do is grab your UV shell and then go to tool and choose smooth. And what happens is Maya creates this sort of little interface here. There's a relax component as well as an unfold component to the smooth tool, and I very much prefer the unfold. And the way it works is you hold your left mouse button down over the word unfold, and then move your mouse left and right. And what happens is Maya goes through a series of mathematical calculations as you slide your mouse and sort of interactively adjusts the UVs. And what I like about this is you can kind of stop anywhere you want where you really feel like it looks its best and just stop doing it. Because you can see when I start, they don't look great. When I finish, they're better, but still not great. I might want to choose a spot somewhere in between in terms of getting the best possible layout for what it is I'm trying to do. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, something that you need to think about when you're using this tool is what kind of shell am I getting when I'm all done? And the reason this is important is because, let's say, for example, on my object that I'm creating the shells for, I have text on it, right? There's something written on the side, again, marker O, or some kind of graphic or something like that. When you create text in an application like Photoshop or something like that, does it create the text linearly, like it all lines up like it's on a sentence? Or are the words just sort of haphazard wherever? What do you guys think? If I type in letters in Photoshop, do they come out in a straight line? Yeah. Typically, yeah, right? So the problem is, if I've got a UV shell that represents a flat surface, but it's curved like a big smile, I'm going to have to make text and then I'm going to have to use Photoshop's tools to modify that text to kind of bend it to make it fit. Does that make sense? If I left that shell perfectly square, I could just use square text and it's going to come right out super easy, and I don't have to worry about things being warped or distorted in any way. Does that make a little sense? Okay, so the point is, again, what do I need it to do might dictate your tool choice. Does that make sense? Okay, so looking at this, you know, this improvement is definitely, or this layout is definitely an improvement about where I was. I got eliminated the seams. I've got less distortion in there. It's looking pretty good. This might be pretty close to my final layout. It's looking pretty good. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the only way to try to make this look better. I can also use, if I want, the unfold tool. And the unfold tool is a little bit closer to seeming like magic, because the unfold tool is basically you select the UV shell and you tell Maya, make this look better. And Maya goes through all of its math, and then it's done. So again, it's just one more thing you can try to get the wrinkles out. I like the smooth tool just because you can see what it's doing. You can see its mathematical adjustments and then stop at any point along the way interactively. Does that make sense? Oh, also, similarly, something important for you to realize about the smooth tool as well as the unfold tool is I might select just one area on my shell and try to unfold that. I don't necessarily have to unfold the whole thing at once. I can just do one little part if I want to. And it will only unfold the parts that are selected. So if this part looks fine and I don't want to mess with it, I can do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's take a look at the unfold tool. So I'm going to let that go back to where it was. And this time, I'm going to use the unfold tool on the exact same UV shell. So now I'm going to go to modify. And again, if you're in the old version of Maya or the old version of the UV editor, it's under Polygon. I'm going to go down to the unfold tool. And in terms of the unfold tool, there's Unfold 3D and there's also the legacy version. And legacy just means the old version of the tool. So if you're really comfortable and familiar with that one, that's how you get to those settings. Or you can just switch it to the Unfold 3D tool with its standard setup. And again, if I hit apply, you'll see it's going to totally change the shape of this for my object. Now, in looking at this, this UV shell does look a heck of a lot more like I think this piece would look if I unfolded it, right? But do you see how it kind of twisted my checker pattern around? Okay, so I do have an improved quality layout, yes. But if I have text moving across this marker cap, that's going to be hard for me to line that up right. Does that make sense? Because the checkers are going off on a weird angle there. Does that make sense? It's not nice and crisp. So the question becomes, do I use the unfold tool? Do I use the smooth UVs tool? Or is it good enough the way it was before, where it's actually the easiest to apply the texture? Does that make sense? These are the questions you have to think about. Me personally, I would probably go with the version of the smooth tool because it was closer to the right shape and proportion, less distortion, but still my checkers looked fairly neat. Does that make sense? So, and the reason I show you these different versions and give you these different issues and concerns is because it's not, I have a shell, unfold it. I have a shell, smooth it. You really have to think about what you're doing and why, because there is a rationale behind the stuff you do. Does that make sense? It's not like, this dish is dirty, wash it. You got to be thinking, well, what's this dish made of? Does it go in the dishwasher or not? What kind of soap can I use on it? To what degree do I have to clean it? You know what I mean? You got to put some thought into what you're doing and why, because it will absolutely guide your process. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay, good. All right, so Brian and I are going to walk around a little bit. I just want to see you guys play with the Smooth UVs tool as well as the Unfold tool, and then we're going to get into texture application. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah, no worries. I'll take a look at that at the end of the class. Yeah. Let's get into today's material here. No worries. That's because you have your pack option on. If you uncheck pack, yeah, that's your unfold. Let me put that in there. Incidentally, everybody, one thing I wanted to show you with regard to the unfold tool is make sure you have unchecked the pack option, because what that's going to do is take all of your shells and stick them into the 0 to 1 for you, which sometimes you want it to do that, but sometimes not. So in this instance, we don't want that to happen. So uncheck pack. Thank you for. It does look like a purse. Yep. Well, I would say let's take a look at how you attach those shells to each other. And I think maybe something is not attached that you think is attached. No, you can go to edge, right? And then let's get up in here because I have a feeling some of this is not attached to each other. So let's select it. There you go, select an edge. Yeah, see how that's green? And then let's go down and see if it's green down here. Yeah, no, it thinks it's one thing. Let's try sewing it again just in case maybe it didn't do it right. Let's come up here, grab that edge, and then double click the one on the other side. All right, ooh, and hold shift while you're doing it. Yeah, just go over that side, hold shift, double click. Ooh, make sure you're in edge mode though. Yeah, there you go. Grab that one, and then double click the one on that side. That's interesting. Let me try it for 1 second and just see if it's a touch thing or not.
Well, first, in addition to that, because you've already got the resolution, you start scaling that, moving, you're changing the resolution. Right. You scale that.
Interesting that your UVs are also lighting up.
You put all the shells together first, because if you scale one, then you change the resolution, right? So that's the point of moving them, getting them all individually to the right resolution. Then you can take the whole thing and scale it down.
Yeah, I think they were not attached before. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just that top part there, and then I'm going to try to use the Smooth UVs tool. No, it's under tool in this version. Okay. Yeah. And just see what happens when I run it on this part to make sure I'm getting what looks like a decent result, which I am now. So now I can run it on the whole thing and see if I'm getting more of what I want. So there we go. It's not attached down here.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So you can sort of diagnosing it.
All right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. How you guys doing over here? Good. Awesome. Yep. Using the Smooth UVs tool. Very nice. Very good. You use the unfold. Which one do you like better, Smooth or unfold? Smooth, I think, it's a little bit more, I don't know, I feel like I have more control over it. The other one I would worry about a little bit. Make sure you grab the UVs. You have to be in UV mode. There you go. Very good. How are you guys doing with it? Good, good. Yep, unfold. Smooth. We get to your questions about making those squares look better. No, it was a good idea because that's what we're headed to next. I know we're presenting the material properly when you're asking me the questions about what we're going to talk about next.
Just trying to fix a couple.
Yeah, that looks a little crazy right there.
Yeah, just trying to fix it up. I don't know, it just happened.
Oh, okay. Well, Z back a couple of steps and kind of try to undo that. There you go. Make sure you attach the correct edges to each other. So you want to grab these guys down here and sew them to the, well, not all of them, just there to there. There you go. Double click. There. Now sew those two together. Yes. Yep.
How do you do like?
Make sure you grab one, hold shift, and double click the other. Grab one, hold shift, double click. There you go. There you go. How you doing? Ah, yes, because that's the seam right here.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, this looks so weird.
Yes, that's I'm going to show that to class actually. You got it? Yeah.
So, like,
Go to UV mode. You have to grab all the UVs in the shell. UV. There you go. Grab them all. Now, that's when you go to unfold. All right, my friends, something I wanted to show you while we're right here is if you look at the other side of our little marker thing, you'll see the texture seam. And what we're looking at right there is this edge right here and this edge right here, which do not connect to each other. And as a result, we have this texture seam. So in terms of our UV shell, if we're looking at our marker from this side, we're totally fine. That's not going to represent the problem. However, if I'm going to be seeing my marker from this side, that's an issue. Does that make sense? So what I would have to do is move that seam because it's not good right there. Now, to be honest with you, there's two ways I could do it. I could either grab the geometry and just rotate it and put that sucker on the bottom because lucky for me, it's a cylinder more or less, so I could just move it. But if it was an object that I could not do that to, I might have to go to the bottom of my object here and figure out which edge is on the bottom, and I see it's that one, in which case I would have to grab that entire edge, and I'm going to cut that edge, and then I'm going to grab this edge, and then move and sew, and now my seam is no longer on the side there, it's on the bottom. But in so cutting and moving that shell, I created some distortion, which made some yuckiness in here. So here's where I'm going to have to revisit using my Smooth UVs tool, which is under Tools? Tools, yeah. They like to move stuff around. But now I can smooth it again. And now this side looks good, and that side looks good, and my seam is on the bottom where it's not going to affect anything. Does that make sense? Literally, I make the seam where I want it to be, reattach the shells elsewhere to eliminate. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Like I said, UV mode, yep. Yep, you got to select the UVs when you're doing all this stuff. Not really, no. And some of the tools will work some of the time when you're doing that in different modes. But what I would recommend is if it's not one mode, try the other. But in terms of moving and sewing, edges work best. And in terms of moving the shells around and unfolding, you want to make sure you're selecting the UVs because that does make a difference. It is a component that you are manipulating. So make sure you're in that mode. All right. Any questions about move and sew? Any questions about unfold, smooth UVs? Okay. So this is one piece of this object, right? I'm going to do that to all the pieces of this marker. Does that make sense? Same process. Create the shells using either the planar mapping tool or the cylindrical mapping tool. And then once I've got those shells, I'm going to sew some of them together. I'm going to cut some of them apart. And then after I get those shells, you know, attached pretty well, then I'm going to take the iron to it, and I'm going to use my Smooth UVs tool or my Unfold tool if it makes things better or easier for me. Not it has to. It's just if it's better as a result and it does more of what I need it to do, I do it. Does that make sense? Thinking, always thinking when we're doing stuff. All right. Let's get back to our sliderific slides. All right, let's talk about the UV mapping. Once our UV shells are finalized and everything's looking good, meaning I've got the same size squares on my object, and everything seems to be smoothly attaching to each other. I don't have seams where I don't want them. Now we move into the next phase, which is the creation and then the application of a texture. And then that's how we really see this stuff start to come to life when we add the color information to what it is we've modeled. Now, in terms of our shell layout, of course, we want to have the best possible shell layout, and we want to fit all of our shells in the 0 to 1 space. As you recall, that upper right-hand corner is where Maya goes by default to find texture information. So what I will do is make sure that once I get my shell looking good and I'm very happy with what I'm seeing, I want to make sure to grab that shell and bring it over to my 0 to 1. And of course, I'm going to make it small enough so that it'll fit. And what I'm going to do is make sure that all of my shells fit in there. So every piece of my marker will fit into that little space there. So don't panic, they all go in there. And again, the good news is, as long as the resolution was good when I was when it was big, it doesn't change the resolution when I make it smaller, because I actually control how big that space is. Because right now it's just called the 0 to 1, an arbitrary space, arbitrary value. That space is as big as I say it is. So when it comes to making a texture, in this 0 to 1 space, I decide how big it is, how high a resolution it has. I can say that this is 1 inch by 1 inch. I can say this is 1 mile by 1 mile. That's my choice. Does that make sense? The only thing that I want to be very aware of is making sure that my shells have the same resolution as each other. Does that make sense? So I decide how many pixels go in there ultimately. So don't be afraid. A lot of times students are like, well, the shells are huge, and when I get them into the 0 to 1, they're so tiny. I'm totally ruining my texture size. My resolution is going to be awful. No, that texture is as big as you say it is, because when you go to create the texture for it, you tell Maya how big to make that, what resolution you want. Does that make sense? We're just trying to get the shells to be proportionate to each other, the correct resolution relative to each other. That's the important part for us. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay, good. Thank you for playing. All right. So now, back over in Maya land, what we end up doing once we get everything into the 0 to 1 is we then apply color. And all we do is, again, it's like paint by numbers. We just paint inside these areas, because this tells me there's my arm, there's my chest, there's my back, there's my hand. You can see these pieces. So again, I color them in, and then I can apply the color. Now, how would you guys like to play with some texture application? And there was much rejoicing. All right, good. Well, I've got a little activity for you. It builds off of the one we did last class. You guys remember when we UV mapped the cube, the cylinder, and the plane? Well, we made some textures for you so that you can apply them. So break out that file of the cube, the cylinder, and the plane, and we can work on that together. I'm going to do File, Open, Scene, and I want this activity, which we completed last class. And again, you'll notice when I grab the stuff in the UV editor, everything fits in there nicely and neatly. All the shells, everything is in there. Make sense? Okay. So let's take a look at texture application. Now, texture application is actually something we've already done. So you're actually going to be pretty, you're going to remember this, I think. When we put the checker pattern on our geometry so we could do the UV mapping, That was the application of a texture. So what you're going to find out is that when we apply textures to our geometry, it's the same thing, which is why I had you guys do it, because repetition is king when it comes to learning. So in terms of how do I apply a texture to my geometry, these are the steps. You want to make sure you have these down. These are the steps to apply a texture to your geometry. Now, the first thing is you have to make sure you set your project, because just like when we bring image planes into Maya, the images are in our source images folder and Maya brings them right in and it populates and we can build. Textures also go in the source images folder. So if you put your images, your textures in the source images folder and set your project to the Maya project folder, Maya will be able to find and apply your textures. Now the good news is we've already made these textures for you. I made one for each of these objects, and they're already in the source images folder of your activity file folder. So if you've set your project, you're already good to go. But I wanted to let you know two things. You've got to put that texture in the source images folder for whatever it is you're texturing when you do the texturing. And then the other thing is you typically don't create the texture first and then apply it to the geometry. Typically, you build the object, you UV map it, and then you use your UV layout to paint the texture as a guide. But we just don't have time to paint a texture in this class as much as I'd like to be able to do that with you guys. That'd take too much time. So I made a texture in advance, but it will fit this UV layout. Does that make sense? Typically, you don't have a texture in place first. And I would say never, but like weird stuff happens sometimes where the texture is done first. Heck, one time I was given a rig and I was told to build a model that fit the rig, which is the craziest thing ever. I mean, you build the model first and then you make the skeleton that goes inside. But no, these guys wanted it the other way. So, weird stuff happens. But point being, typically, you create the texture after you UV map. So, in terms of the application of texture, these are the steps. Number one, you've got to set your project to the project file. In this case, it's the activity file folder. Two, go to your Hypershade and create a new material. Window, rendering editors, Hypershade. Hypershade opens up. You see the default materials in Maya as well as your checker pattern. So I'm going to come over here to the Create section and make a new Lambert. All right, we work in Lamberts in this class. It keeps us out of trouble. I'm going to open up my attribute editor, and I'm going to name this my plane texture, because this is the material that I'm going to apply to my geometry plane. Now, in terms of applying the checker pattern, who remembers where we went for that? Because that's the next step. How did we apply the checker pattern? Do you guys remember? Middle mouse button is how I applied it to the geometry. But how did I plug the texture pattern into the material, though? Does anybody? Yeah, that's right. Remember the color channel? That's like, what does the material look like? I went to the little checker box in the end and I clicked on it, and that's how I got to the checker pattern. Well, I'm going to do the same thing here because this is a texture also. So I go to the checker pattern at the end of the color channel, click on it, and that opens up the Create Render Node window. Remember, we were here before. We wanted this node last time, the one that says checker on it. This time we want two down, the File node. The File node, you'll see it looks kind of like two spikes with a circle. This is supposed to look like a picture. I think that's supposed to be two hills and the sun or something. I don't know. But anyway, this is how we apply. This is the node that allows you to apply an image to the surface of a material. So if I click on File, Maya creates a File node for my material. And of course, it's jet black because Maya's like, okay, so you're going to put a picture in for the color of your object. Well, what picture? I have no idea. So I'm just going to leave it black for now until you tell me. So inside the File node, you'll note right here where it says Image Name under File Attributes. Image Name. And it's blank because Maya doesn't know what picture you want to plug in there. But there is a yellow folder over here. And we know that when we click on yellow folders, that's our way to navigate to the thing we want. We're telling Maya, follow this path to find the thing you need. So if I click on this yellow folder, Maya immediately goes to my source images folder and says, well, which one of these pictures do you want? Again, I set my project, so Maya goes right where I want it to. And I'm going to choose my UV plane texture and hit open. So what happens is this picture has now been plugged into this material. So now all I have to do is make this plane out of this material. How do I do that? Apply it. So that's the next step. I just have to use the middle mouse button, drag and drop this material, and now the texture is on this object. And if it's not lined up perfectly, you can see my frame doesn't seem to fit quite right here. I'm going to go to my UV editor, and I'm going to look at my UV layout, and you can see that the precise alignment of this shell will absolutely determine how that image lays on my object. And to be honest with you, I'm going to drag that up a little bit. I'm going to grab these two UVs down here, and I'm just going to drag them down a little bit so that it encompasses that detail of the bottom of the frame. Can you make little tiny tweaks even after the texture has been created? Absolutely, if need be. So now it fits better. And now I can see this really funky texture on my geometry. And again, the part that I love about textures is if you look at that picture frame, it looks 3D. That looks like a very detailed piece of geometry with a picture of a monkey in it, right? But it's not. It's just a plane of geometry, a single face. Textures can do the work that your geometry can't support, which is one of the great things about texturing. I can make things look more detailed than they really are. Love that. So again, that looks like a highly complex piece of geometry, but it's not. And that's a trick that video game makers use all the time. And it doesn't matter what level of game you're talking about. So again, very fun when you apply a texture. All right? Is everybody able to do this? Got the monkey on? Yeah? No?
My things are all messed up. The other day I was trying to fix it back somehow. It's like, I don't have half the stuff.
That's okay. Everything is under window. If you go to window, the different windows you need are in there. You can create the material viewer, you can create the browser, you can create the create section. Whichever one you're missing is a window in there. All right. How you guys doing with the application of the picture? It's going well? Okay. Cool. All right. So let's take a look at the next thing. Incidentally, in terms of that material with the picture on it, could I take that same material and apply it to a different object? Absolutely. I can apply that to as many different objects as I want. But my UV layout will affect the way the texture appears on the geometry. So since this texture was not made to work with this UV layout, that's why it doesn't look right, right? Looks like some kind of abstract Daliism kind of thing, right? But anyway, point being, this object was not designed to have that on there, so that's why it doesn't line up. So I'm going to have to create a new material to apply the texture that goes to this object. So again, I go to my UV editor, I'm sorry, to the Hypershade, and somehow my materials got out of the Hypershade, so I'm just going to see if I can get it to go back in there somehow. I love that tearaway thing that Maya does now. There it goes. Now it fits. Okay. So, time to make a new material. Again, to apply the texture, the steps are the same. We've already set our project, so now we make the new material. Lambert material. This one's going to be called cube texture. Again, I go to the color channel. I go to the checker box at the end. In the Create Render Node window, I open the File node. When the File node opens, under File Attributes, I go to Image Name. I click on the yellow folder, and it takes me back into here, and then I'm going to grab my cube texture and bring it in. Now that I've created this material, I'm going to apply it to the cube. Now again, it's the same process again and again, thankfully, which is nice. You can count on it, but you got to have those steps. Now, again, my texture does not seem to be lining up. So let me take a look at my UV editor and see what's going on. Oh, okay. You see my shells are not over the appropriate pictures because the shell just transmits image. So whatever's inside this box is what shows up on my geometry. So let's start simple. Here's the front of the cube. If I select this face, I find out that this shell represents that face, right? So if I take that guy and I put it over the part of my texture that looks like it's the front of my monkey cage, the monkey appears there. All right? So I got that on there. And you see, the effect of the texture is pretty cool. Let's do the top of the cage. So this is the top of my cage. This is the texture of the top of my cage. This is the face. So I'm going to take this face and put it over there. Again, whatever that's on top of is what gets sort of transmitted to my object. Grab this face. This is the left side of my cube if you are the cube. So I put that over the left side of my monkey cage. This is the back of my monkey cage, right? So I'm going to move this over the back image of my texture. That's the back view of my monkey. This is the bottom of my cube. That's the bottom of my texture. So I'm going to put that up there. And then this has got to be the other side. It says danger. So I put that over. All right. Oh, wait. It doesn't say danger. It says regnad. It says danger there, regnad there. What do you think? What's wrong? Just like a mirror shows you things backwards, right? I don't know if you guys have ever seen an ambulance behind you in your rearview mirror. You look up and you can read ambulance or fire or emergency because they write it backwards on the vehicle. So when you see it in your mirror, you can actually read it. So this is backwards because there's something wrong with my shell. It's upside down or backwards, just like a mirror. UV shells can accidentally be backwards. That happens. The good news is it's easy to fix. First, I'm going to show you the tool that will identify shells with a problem, and second, I'll show you how to fix it. So first, identify the problem. We asked Maya to tell us which way our shells are facing. So in the UV editor, if you go to View, you can choose Shaded. If you have the old version of Maya, you go under Tools, and it's Shade UVs, if I remember right. And what that does is it throws color onto your shells. Blue shells are facing the right way. Red shells are facing the wrong way. Does that make sense? Very easy to figure out which one's going the right way and which one's going the wrong way. Incidentally, what do you think Maya uses to determine if they're upside down or not? How does Maya know if it's upside down? What component? The normals, absolutely, because normals indicate light direction on the surface of the geometry. it helps us determine the inside and the outside of the object. So if the shell's upside down, it's using the normals to figure it out that it's wrong. But here's a bigger question. Second and third tier thoughts. How did I accidentally end up with shells upside down? How could that have possibly happened? Anybody have any thoughts? This is a hard one. I wouldn't be surprised if nobody had a thought. I'm guessing Carl might have an idea, though. No Carl today. I'm devastated. Philip, talk to me. How could I have accidentally created shells that are upside down? It's not like I chose that. Do you guys remember when I was UV mapping these things? I UV mapped one face in X, and then the face on the other side, our first thought was negative X, but there's not a negative X. So if I have a cube and I'm taking a picture in X, this side is the outside, but X on that side is a UV shell created from the inside of the face, not the outside. Does that make sense? I made it backwards. Now, good news is this is very easy to fix. There's a tool called the flip tool, and literally that's what it does. It just flips over the shells. So all you have to do is select a shell, and then I believe it's under modify for the new version, flips it to blue, and then the old one, it's under polygons, and you'll see flip, and it's like in the top third or so. So depending on which version you have, you can just flip your shells. Flip it good. And so now you can see it was Ragnad until I flipped it, and then now it's danger. Does that make sense? Good hell yeah on that? Thank you for playing. All right, now, just a little bit of a recap for you guys. Number one, we're trying to minimize texture seams, right? Connect shells to each other whenever and wherever we can. Number two, good UV layout. Make sure there's as little distortion as possible on our shells, right? Number three, get all of your shells inside the 0 to 1 space. Number four, make sure they're all blue, facing the right way. These are the important ground steps for good UV mapping. You think this is things we're grading on? Yes, this is absolutely what we're grading on. So when you guys UV map your objects, minimize seams, minimize distortion, get everything into the 0 to 1, make sure it's blue. That is the overwhelming majority of what we are grading on. Does that make sense? The lion's share of points. Make sure you do those things because that's what we want. Again, you can verify it in the self-grade. That's what we're looking for. Just those elements. You hit that, you're going to be doing really well. Make sense? Okay. Now, just a little bit of a thought process for you guys that's kind of cool. Let's say, for example, I wanted my whole cube to have this texture on it, this roof texture here. I could literally grab my shells and put them on top of each other. And wherever I took those shells and put them on top of each other, that's what those textures are going to show. So I can put them on top of each other and literally make my whole cube have the same thing on it. Because the shells just show me whatever they're over, right? This is called stacked UVs. I literally stack them on top of each other to effectively repeat a texture element. Does that make sense? For this class, we do not stack our shells. We use collage UV technique. Collage UVs means they all get their own space within the 0 to 1, the way it was laid out previously. Like this. No shells on top of each other, no overlapping. Make sense? Two different ways to use the UV editor. in terms of texture. Why would you want one over the other? Well, if I only have one texture that's going to be on the entire object, why not make that shell as big as I can make it, have that one element in there, and that will increase the resolution, and I can just put all my shells on top of each other, and it'll just show through. Does that make sense? So again, what do I need it to do dictates how you go about doing it, right? With that in mind, let's take a look at something here. You are so pushy, Maya. Here is a sample texture, right? This is the character with the texture on. This is the geometry. This is the 0 to 1 space and effectively the texture map for this character. Some thought had to go into this in the creation of this texture. Why is only half of the face painted? What's that? You can mirror it, right? I can paint just half of the face. If both sides of the face look the same, if it's okay for me to stack my UVs, I can stack them on each other and the same texture will be on both sides. Why would I do that? It definitely will save me some time because I don't have to paint the whole face. But what else? There's another thing. Time is a good one, though. Anytime you can save time, that's good. If I only have to paint half the face, I can make it bigger. Does that make sense? If I can make the face painting bigger, I'm increasing the resolution. Does that make sense? If I paint the whole face, it's going to occupy more of the 0 to 1, fewer pixels. Half a face, I can get twice the pixels in there. Does that make sense? Strategy. What do I need it to do? Dictates how you go about doing it. Does that make sense? Same thing. They only made one hand, one sleeve, half the outfit. Because they can make all those shells bigger if they do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, it's what do I need it to do that dictates how you go about doing it. And I bet if you were a little confused about resolution, you're feeling a lot better now. All right. All righty. Let's go on to the next and last thing we're going to talk about today. Texture application. In terms of UVs, again, good UV layout allows us to create textures, and we're going to actually make a texture in this class, a simple one. We're going to create what is called an ambient occlusion path, or a speck path, or a dirt path. They all have different names, but it's the same thing. And what we're doing is creating sort of dirt or shadowy information on an object, and it helps to accentuate the details of that model. Now, in terms of what the heck is ambient occlusion, if you make a fist right now and look at the top of your hand, you'll see what looks kind of like a little Charlie Brown tree with 3 branches on it on the ground, right? And there's shadow in there, the creases and cracks on your knuckles. That's sort of self-shadowing. Parts of your body are casting shadow on other parts of your body. Light can't quite get in there to the same degree as it gets to the rest of the surface. And those shadows create an emphasis on detail. It makes things pop. It gives them depth. Ambient occlusion is the idea that what we want to do is capture that information about where shadows fall and keep it so that it's always on there, no matter where the light is. Does that make sense? Capturing shadow information. So, what we're going to do is create an ambient occlusion path for our objects. The way I'd like you to think of ambient occlusion is it's kind of similar to old school photography. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but we've got photographic paper, right? It's sensitive to light. It records light and shadow information, black and white photography, right? Take a picture, you take the paper, you put it in a special fixing chemical, and then images start to appear on the surface, right? It's sensitive to light. To create the ambient occlusion path, we're going to do something like that. I'm going to apply material, special material, to my object. It's light-sensitive material. And what's going to happen is I'm going to tell Maya, listen, look at how light is striking my object. Look at where the shadows are falling on my object, and remember that information. Create a texture for me, a photograph, if you will, of where the shadow information falls. And then what I can do is take that texture and apply it to my geometry, and then my geometry will always have those fun little shadows on it that accentuate neat details on the models I built. It's kind of like a dry brushing technique where things that are deeper down get darker colors and things towards the surface get lighter colors, and it helps accentuate and create depth and separation. Does that make sense? Makes your models look cool. So in terms of that ambient occlusion, let's take a look at this process. All right. Now, you guys have UV mapped a jar. That's what we did. I don't remember which. That was last class, actually. So that should be skill check number 8 is UV map a jar. So we are going to do a similar thing here. Or we're going to use that jar. And incidentally, if you want to, I have also created a texture for the cylinder. If you want to apply it, you can go ahead and do that. Again, the steps are exactly the same. Create a new material, feed the cylinder texture into the color channel, and then that will apply it, and then make sure your shells line up. But you can do that one as well. I recommend it. It helps you understand how that works. But let's get to the jar asset here. So I'm going to set my project to my skill check file. And then I'm going to open up my, I'm going to open up my jar asset for UV mapping. All right. So my UVs not laid out yet, which doesn't help me, but that's all right. I'm going to map that sucker. I'm going to do a cylindrical map. All right. Incidentally, my shading is still on, so I can see the inside is red and the outside is blue, because my inside and outside are flipped, or my inside is flipped because I UV'd it from the outside. I cut that to create some separation between those shells. There's my two shells. And grab these guys on the bottom. That's a planer. Oop, I missed somebody. There we go. This one needs to be flipped. There we go. Oh, and I got some guys in here, of course. All right, grab that guy and flip it. Okay. So now my shells are looking pretty good. Everything's blue, everything's facing the right way, looks decent. This one attaches there. Okay. So now my object has been UV mapped. I got all these separate shells. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I'd rather spend more time demonstrating the AO pass to you. But all right. Now, what makes for a good texture is also what makes for, or what makes for a good UV layout is what makes for a good ambient occlusion pass as well. So you want to make sure you do a decent job of laying that thing out, because that will absolutely affect how this turns out. All right. Now I'm going to try to get my stuff back down into the 0 to 1. And by the way, that was just a very quick tutorial on how to UV map your your jar asset. So if you want to watch that one again. All right. Now, in terms of the creation of the ambient occlusion pass, the first thing we have to do is turn on our Arnold renderer, because we're going to be using a special material that allows us to capture light and the shadow information. So we have to turn on Arnold because this is the rendering engine or the application that's going to create the images for us. And by default, it's not turned on. So we have to turn that on. Now, in terms of where we go to find out if it's on or not, if you go to Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, if you open up the settings, you'll see that it defaults to Maya software as the rendering engine we're using. And there's a couple of other things in there, but you may not see Arnold down at the bottom. It might be and it might not. If it's not, you just have to turn it on, in which case what you do is go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. Arnold is a third-party plugin, meaning it is something that is built by a different company, but it is meant to work with Maya, but it's not necessarily turned on. So when we go to the Plugin Manager, you're going to look down, scroll down a little bit, and you're going to find a bundle called M2A bundle. The letter M, T-O-2-A, which is Arnold. It's Maya to Arnold bundle. And all you have to do is hit loaded and refresh it. And that will load Arnold as your rendering engine. Again, by default, it's not necessarily turned on. So you have to turn it on. Does that make sense? If you don't see Arnold as an option, go back to the link we gave you for downloading Maya and download that version of Maya, because it will have Arnold. It has it for sure. If you got Maya somewhere else, anywhere else from anybody else, it might not necessarily have this. Please make sure. Now, once you've got that set up, when you go to your render settings, again, Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, you can switch it from software to Arnold, because that's what we're going to be using. All right? So now that we've switched it to Arnold, now we're going to apply that special material that captures light and shadow information. So since we're talking about windows or materials, you know we're going to a hypershade. Okay? in the Hypershade, you'll see there's a section under Create where Arnold's got all this fun stuff in here. And what we want is if you select the word shader, you'll see ambient occlusion. There's a node for that specifically. So the next step is we just create an ambient occlusion material. There it is. Now, just like before, we want to take that ambient occlusion material, hold down the middle mouse button, and just drag it and drop it on the object. So now our object is made of this ambient occlusion material. Again, the whole purpose of this material is to capture light and shadow information, and it's just going to record where the shadow information is. And it's going to basically create a texture that has the shadows painted on. All right, so now our object is made of that. All right. Let me close this up. Okay. Now, in terms of the material and the settings, what we want to do is we're going to go to, now this looks different. I'm going to go to, oh, is that what it is? I'm used to it. You know what it is? I'm used to that being up all the time. All right. Well, each version of Maya has its own joy. So here we are under Arnold, and we're going to go to Utilities. And you will see Render Selection to Texture. And that's basically what it's going to do is a render, but it's going to generate an image for us, a picture of shadow information. All right? So I say Render Selection to Texture. Now, in terms of output folder, where do you want this image to go? I'm going to choose my source images folder because that's where I want it in my skill check source images folder. So that's where it's going to go. The texture, the image it's going to create. It defaults at 512 for resolution. Let's just bump it up a tiny bit to 1024, just to make it a little bit higher resolution, a little bit better quality. Better quality will yield a more crisp and less sort of fuzzy looking bit of shadow information. The rest of this we don't even have to play with. And we just hit render. And then Maya and Arnold work together and create a material. And as I said, it is in our source images folder. I just want to navigate to that. Of our skill check. And you'll see oh, where did you go? Skill check. Should be in my source image. Oh, you know what? Maybe it did go to the activity folder. Yeah, I thought I set it to the other one, but perhaps I didn't. No, I don't see it in there either. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out where the heck Maya sent it. That's okay. These things happen. So I'm going to go back to Utilities and go back to Render to Texture. And it went to, yeah, it says it went to Skill Check. And it went to my source images. Very interesting. Not sure why that didn't actually go. I don't know. I got to figure out why that's not working, because that's where it should be. It should be in my skill checks, in my source images. No key. All right, no worries. All right. So I actually don't have much time left. I can't run this down right now. But the good news is for the ambient occlusion pass, there's actually a little movie on the ambient occlusion activity for you guys that I made. So you can watch that. Again, I'm not certain what happened there, but I will look into it. But point being, the information is there. Please watch the little ambient occlusion movie because it takes you through the entire steps. Now, what is important for you to understand about ambient occlusion? Yes, it does make your model look cool, but you don't have to do it. You have to do it for your skill check to show that you can demonstrate those skills, but you do not have to create an ambient occlusion pass for the models you are UV mapping. Does that make sense? The stuff you turn into me at the end of this class does not have to have an ambient occlusion pass. I put that in there because it's fun, and it's really not that hard to do. It's just a couple of steps. And it does make your models look significantly better. So please, if you are at all interested in the ambient occlusion pass, watch that little video. Like I said, all the steps are in there, A to Z, and you can see how it all works out. And I got to troubleshoot this file and see why mine's not panning out for me. But you know, I'm wondering if it's just because I didn't select the geometry possibility. I'll try that real quick, but I'm almost out of time. Are there any questions on the ambient occlusion, UV mapping, moving? Is that what it was? Okay, I didn't know if I had. Yeah. Okay, that could be. Like I said, you just have to be missing one little step, and then things don't go well. Oh, there we go. Yep. No, now it's doing its thing. But again, what that's going to do is create a nice image that remembers where the shadows fell on this particular object, and it really makes it look nice. So it is a worthwhile endeavor as a modeler just to make your stuff look better. Yeah, there it is. So this is the image it created. And you can see this is the outside of my jar. This is the shadow information around the lip, that little ring. This is the inside of my jar. The bottom is darker than towards the top where it gets lighter. This is the outside of my jar. That's the inside of my jar. Does that make sense? It remembered all the shadows and where they are. And what's cool about that is I can actually assign a new material to my object and then feed into the color channel the image all right? And when you do that, in many instances, you'll see like, what the heck happened there? There's some weird wackiness going on. And all that is I've got an incoming connection on my transparency channel of the material, which is not the end of the world. You'll see, here's where my color information got plugged in, and there's where some extra transparency got plugged in. And all I do is right mouse button, break connections, and then it no longer has that transparency element. But now my model, you know, there it is without the shadowing. There it is with the shadowing. And you can see it looks cool. A little bit of nice shading in there. Oh, and this is one thing I want to show you. What do you think that is? A seam, a texture seam. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fix it in my editor. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab the edge over here. And using my scale tool, I'm just going to scale those edges towards each other a little bit. And what I'm going to do is tuck them in, because you can see the color information ends and the edge is out here. So it's not getting the color information. So I'm just going to tuck it in a little bit so that it is over this information. So I just switched to my scale tool so I can do them both at once because I'm trying to do it fast. Scale them towards each other a little bit. It tucks them in. Seam is removed. Does that make sense? You can do that with any seam. You just got to tuck in the UVs a tiny bit so that they're actually over the texture. And then they're gone. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, good. All right, so sorry I had to do that last little bit kind of fast, but we were out of class time. So In terms of your skill check for this class, we are going to have you do an AO pass on an object that we built for you. The good news is it's already UV'd, so you don't have to do that part. We UV'd it, the Peppermill, but you will be generating an AO pass for it just so you can demonstrate that you can do that. One very important difference between the jar and the object we gave you, the object we gave you is made of many parts. The jar is made of one. Of the utmost importance, select all the pieces of geometry and combine them. Modify, combine. As one object, then you create the AO pass for it. Does that make sense? If you leave them in separate pieces, it's going to create a different texture for each piece. You could do it that way, and you'd have to plug them all in, different materials, but it would work. Easier if you combine it first and then run it. Make sense? Same steps. All right, so have fun with the AO pass. I think you're going to enjoy it. It really shows off. When you got good UVs, you create a great AO pass. When your UVs are not so hot, you have issues with your AO pass. So you start to understand why UVs are so important. Thank you, everybody. I will see you on Monday. Get those skill checks done on Saturday and start working on what's due Monday evening, because it's a fair amount.
I actually had to swap the two, not spheres, but circles, right? I had to swap their location.